Hey guys, welcome back. Going to talk about Abraham's funeral today. Not a whole lot said about it, but it's interesting who showed up and how great a life Abraham lived. And one day your life's going to be over, and so will mine. And I wonder what will be said about us. Listen in today.
Welcome to Everyday Truth with Kurt Skelly. We believe the Bible is true and relevant to everyone, everywhere, every day. If today's conversation is a help to you, take a moment to leave a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. Now, let's join Kurt for today's episode.
Welcome back, my friends, to today's episode of Everyday Truth. So glad you joined us for I guess it's the last episode about Abraham, because we're going to talk about his funeral today. And kind of sad, honestly. We've been following Abraham for the last few weeks and talking about this great man of faith. We've entitled this series, Promises Made, Promises Kept. And the great thing about Abraham's life is that he was the recipient of some unbelievable promises, and yet he believed them. He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief. He was strong in faith. And I think the lesson that we can learn from Abraham is that if God says something, it gives his word on something, then it is ours to act in faith. And that's not a misnomer, because faith will always demonstrate itself in action. True faith will. And we find that over and over again in Abraham's life. In chapter 25, we know that Isaac has now received his bride, and Abraham, the Bible says, took a wife, and her name was Keturah. So I think many people know this, but it's a lesser known fact about Abraham's life that when Sarah died, Abram took another wife. The Bible calls her in 1 Chronicles a concubine, but this was not uncommon in those days for a man to have a wife and a concubine. Again, not God ordained, but culturally not uncommon. And Abraham made Keturah his wife at this point, and he bare some children. She bare him some children. Look at verse number 2. She bare him Zimran and Jokshan. Jokshan, by the way, was the father of Sheba, and later on we know famously the Queen of Sheba, named after that son, came to visit the kingdom of Solomon. So that's that. And then Medan and Midian, maybe that's familiar to you because Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, was a priest of Midian, and the Midianites at times in Israel's history were friends, like the time with Moses' father-in-law. At times they were enemies. Remember, it was the Midianites and the children of the east that had come against the land during Gideon's day as a judge. But Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. So these are the sons of Abraham through Keturah. Jokshan begat Sheba, there it is, and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim and Letushim and Leumim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah and Epher and Hanok and Abidah and Idah. All these were the children of Keturah. So interesting that she had 6 sons. Abraham had 6 more sons. 2 of them, there's a little bit more information about their lineage that's given. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that Abraham did not love his other children. It just meant that Abraham understood that the inheritance and the line and the portion, if you will, the double portion, would go to Isaac. And even though Isaac wasn't the oldest son, he was the second oldest biologically. He was the only son of promise, the only miraculous son. And Isaac had those 7 brothers. So you don't think about Abraham in terms of 8 sons, do you? But he did. He had 8 sons, no daughters. He had Ishmael, his oldest biological son. 14 years later, he had Isaac. the son of promise. And now these 6 sons, all younger, obviously, than Ishmael and Isaac. So 8 sons, and they all became great men in their own regard. And part of that is because God promised that. God promised that Abraham would be a father of many nations. And that's not only a physical promise. We see the physical promise here is fulfilled in that these men bear children and nations come out of them, but also the fact that spiritually, there are people of every walk, of every nation, every tribe and kindred that have trusted Christ and thereby are included in Abraham's seed promise. So there's a couple ways by which that prophecy is fulfilled. It says in verse 6, "And unto the sons of the concubines which Abram had, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son while he yet lived eastward unto the east country." Interesting that Abraham gave an inheritance to Isaac, but he sent his sons by these other marriages, this other marriage specifically to Keturah, to the east. So it's almost as if Abraham knew that there could be a natural dispute, inheritance dispute among his sons. So he was very careful to not only give them gifts, but also to allocate where they would live and where they should settle. Now, that obviously didn't entirely solve the tension. And even today, I think there's tension in the Arab world against Israel and vice versa because of this issue that arose way back when with Abraham. And yet Abraham understood that at the very get-go. He understood that this land belongs to Isaac. The inheritance belongs to Isaac. The promise belongs to Isaac, not because Isaac is good, but because this was God's promise, and this is the way by which God supernaturally blessed, and Abraham was walking by faith. Look at verse 7. "And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life." I like how it says that. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life. And I, again, not to make a big deal about the wording, but I feel like that it is significant. It's the days of the years. And when it comes to living our life, we really only have one day to serve God. I think most of us understand that principle. And the one day that we have to serve God is today. That's the only day we have. So when we measure our life by days. Lord, teach me to number my days, that I may apply my heart unto wisdom. And the Bible says, boast not thyself of tomorrow. Thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow. We will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. You don't know tomorrow. You don't know if there will be a tomorrow. What is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart as in the day of provocation. So God constantly comes back to a readiness today. And I think that's important because often the excuse we make is hidden behind good intentions. Like, I'm going to serve God. I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to, you fill in that blank, tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. So we end up living in the preferable future that never arrives, or we end up living in the past, and the only day we're not living is today. And that's just not the way it works. So when Abraham died, the Bible says, the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 160 years. So 175 years of age. Abraham is still kind of in that transitional time after the flood where lifespans were a little bit longer, but they were becoming progressively shorter. And Abraham is dying right in that sphere of time. Verse number 8, then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man, full of years, and was gathered to his people. So Abraham has now died, the first patriarch, a life that really marked the beginning of God's covenant plan to use a nation by whom and by which he would reach the world. And I've said this several times on this podcast, but that is the fact that God specifically chose to set his love upon this nomadic group of people in the middle of nowhere, just a family, a small family, that through this family that would grow to a big nation, through this exclusive love, he set his love upon them, that through exclusivity, he would manifest his inclusivity, that through them, he would reach out to the entire world. So because of Abraham, the entire world can be blessed. Why? Because it was through Abraham that we received Messiah. And that was God's plan for Israel, is that they would reflect his glory and his covenant purpose, and that they would be, in that sense, a witness to the nations. And of course, we know that Israel failed abysmally in that representation. But lest we be too hard on Israel, I wonder sometimes how we're doing as local churches. Are we reflecting the glory of God? Are we an accurate picture of the salvation and redemption that God is and wants to be to a lost and dying world? Look at verse number 9. And his sons, I find this very interesting. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, the Hittites. There was Abraham buried, and Sarah, his wife. So we know that Sarah has already died. She was the first one to occupy that tomb, and now Abraham has followed her in that tomb. Eventually, it'll be Rebekah and Isaac and Jacob and Leah will be in that tomb. But here it's interesting because Isaac, his son, who's 75 years of age right now, right? Because Isaac was born when Abraham was 100. So now that Abraham's 175, Isaac is 75. And Ishmael, we know, was 14 years older than Isaac. So Ishmael is 89. You don't picture that. But these two men, aged themselves, were coming together. Now, they didn't have a whole lot in common, except for the fact that they had this common dad. They had the same dad. And they both had a promise from God. Isaac had this covenantal, unconditional promise, miraculously given by God. And Ishmael also had a promise. Remember, it was God who named Ishmael. God hears. And God did hear the prayer of Hagar. Remember? And Ishmael did have a great promise from God, that God would bless him and he would populate a great nation as well. But Ishmael's promise was not unconditional. And unfortunately, the followers of Ishmael over the years did not keep covenant with God. Almost like the promise that Ahijah made from God to Jeroboam, that the kingdom would be split, and Solomon, his son Rehoboam, would reign as a son of David, but that the northern kingdom would be ruled by non-sons of David, but God would bless them if they would follow. And here we find Isaac and Ishmael both have potential blessing, but only one, by God's grace, received the blessing, and of course that was Isaac. So we'll stop there in verse number 10, and we'll come back to a little bit more about the blessing of Abraham after his death and what happened, how God blessed, and what happened to Isaac's family as we continue to trace the story. So I think what we'll do is we will continue on in this story of Abraham by talking about his son Isaac and then even his son Jacob, just so that we can finish the patriarchs and get all the way to chapter 37. And when we get there, we've already covered chapters 37 through 50 when we did the story of Joseph. So that kind of brings two sections of the Bible together here on Everyday Truth. As always, appreciate you listening. Looking forward to jumping back in tomorrow. Until then, God bless you, my friends.